Colloquium talk. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Vinod Pavarala from University of Hyderabad, where he's been since 1995. As the talk says, he's UNESCO Chair on Community Media since 2011, and will speak to us on that and other matters. We were contemporaries in the university, so go back a long way. With that very brief introduction, let me just invite Vinod to make his presentation. Maybe 40, 50 minutes and then have conversation.
Okay, thank you, Giri. Thanks to the university for having me here. How many of you have at least heard of community radio? Yeah, 2 or 3 people, not bad. Yeah. Do you know of a community radio station here in Bangalore? Has anybody heard of something called Radio Active on Palace Road? No? You should check it out if you haven't. It's, well, I think there is a issue of range. So how far their signal goes, I'm not very sure. But if you are in the, within the range, they are on 90.4. Yeah? Yeah. And they should be online as well. One of the more interesting community radio stations in the country, especially one that works in urban areas. There are not too many interesting urban community radio stations, but Radio Active here in Bangalore does some very interesting work. You can check it out. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is 10 years of community radio in India. I know only 3-4 of you have heard of it, but believe it or not, community radio in India has been in existence for at least 10 years now. And there are some specific issues related to where we are today in community radio and the movement for public access to airwaves that I will bring up towards the end of my talk, which is to do with the title of this talk, Blurred Development Vision, that I'll bring up as we go along. But I want to give you a little idea of why do we need to talk about community media, community radio, a little bit of history of how we got this right to broadcast, citizens' right to broadcast with certain conditions, but some right that we today have, and what are the constraints within which the community radio sector is functioning, and some of the issues that are now emerging in the sector that is causing me some concern. Yeah? Just a little, what should I say, confessions about my own involvement in this, so you have an idea of where I'm coming from. Yeah, I'm primarily a media studies communication academic with very strong interest in issues of social change, especially communication and social change. And I have been involved in this sort of community radio movement in India going back to something like 1996, 1997. 1996, Bangalore was host to an important landmark event. It's talked about as a Bangalore Declaration on Community Radio. So there's a lot of emotional link to Bangalore and community radio for me personally. So I've been involved in this for a while, studying, understanding communities' abilities to make media on their own, but also doing a fair amount of advocacy work. Because unless there is a policy environment that allows communities to broadcast, it's not possible. There are many parts of the world where people don't have the right to broadcast. Yeah? So I've been doing a lot of work on policy advocacy. The first policy recommendations that I will mention later about 10 years old now, a little more than 10 years old, were first drafted in my department, then went on to become national policy. So myself and colleagues in the department have been quite closely connected with the community radio movement in the country. Yeah? So that's sort of just the context personally. Okay, I would like to start with the idea of media globalization, yeah, which in a way for me is one entry point into community media. That media is globalized. More and more media outlets are owned by big corporations with multinational linkages. One big international corporation owning multiple media across the world. I mean, this is something that most of us know of. You have heard of names like Rupert Murdoch, the media mogul. So Rupert Murdoch's name rarely goes without it being followed by the term media mogul. Yeah? And he owns media wall to wall in every continent in the world, yeah? Including in India. The Star Television network is a Rupert Murdoch owned network, right? So what is the impact of media globalization on people? On what we know, what we can see, what we can hear? What is its impact on plurality and diversity has been a concern for a lot of media scholars. Since the mid-1990s, probably around the time that some of you were born, you probably don't know the situation maybe just a few years before that, but the situation where television sets came with basically DD1 and DD2, yeah, and DD2 was a major achievement. I mean, we only had DD1, yeah. So it was not a very pluralistic media landscape, at least in terms of broadcasting. We had All India Radio, we had Doordarshan. Yeah, there were newspapers and magazines. And the liberalization, privatization, globalization processes in India of the 1990s was supposed to herald a plural media landscape, that you can now watch so many TV channels, you can listen to so many radio stations and so on and so forth, that people now have a choice, yeah, like in a supermarket. You can pick and choose what you want, yeah. It was supposed to bring in diversity and plurality and so on. But ironically, many of us have been saying, what it has resulted in is actually a rapid decline in the range and quality of information available. This has actually resulted in the erosion of plurality of information. At home, my daughter tells me that our satellite connection allows us to get some 500 TV channels. I don't know, maybe more. On a satellite connection linked to Rupert Murdoch, Tata Sky. Sky network is owned by Rupert Murdoch. Now, that 500 channels, that's your diversity of choice. And on a typical evening, and I'm sitting in front of the TV changing channels, and there is nothing to watch. Yeah, I don't know if that has happened to you, but it's a lot of people's experience. Yeah, there's so much out there, but there's nothing to watch very often. Why? Because there is no diversity. You get the same stuff everywhere, same soap operas, same 24/7 news channels. It only substitutes personalities. Some of the talking heads in news studios are also the same. They go from one studio to the other. Often they don't even change their shirts. So you can just recognize, oh, I just saw him on Rajdeep's show and now he's on Arnab's show and whatever. Yeah? And exactly the same stories. Yeah? Rahul Gandhi's arrest, wall to wall on every channel. Yeah? I mean, there's not much one is gaining from the so-called diversity. Yeah? And what it does to this idea of civil society has been of a concern. If civil society can be understood as the capacity for people sort of an organized capacity for people to enter into public discourse about the nature of their life, nature of their lives together. It is essential, if you understand civil society like that, it is essential that flows of information among citizens is democratized. That there is some democratic media landscape, which I am suggesting and many people are suggesting is actually shrinking. With the increase in media outlets, we are actually becoming less and less diverse. There are more and more similar, homogeneous media content that we get. So, community media has been offered by civil society organizations, grassroots organizations across the world, from Latin America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, as an alternative, perhaps as a mode of resistance to the hegemonic mainstream media that we have. Yeah? If you need to resist Rupert Murdoch, you can go on criticizing forever, but what can we do about it? So one of the things we can do about it is, as citizens, to learn how to do media. Instead of being passive receivers of media, how can we become active producers of media? Yeah? And it's not just you and me educated. I mean, even non-literate people in rural areas and others, how can they gain access to media? This is about, this is what community media is about. Yeah? So community media is being spoken of as this kind of an alternative to both state-dominated and corporate-dominated media. Citizen groups, community organizations, media activists across the world have been advocating for an appropriate space in each country's media landscape where they can do something like this, where they can gain access to the airwaves, gain access to modes of storytelling through media. People who can talk about themselves would need some access to media technologies, right? And this is what this movement is about. And how this access can facilitate new centers of symbolic power, yeah? New kinds of cultural enclaves in the country which are not controlled by market forces and state forces, outside of those two. The other point is also about access to information. And usually people who talk about information technologies and digital divide usually tend to talk about it in a way which says everybody should have sort of the right to receive information. It's about getting access to computers so you can get internet access and so on. This is an additional thing that many of us are suggesting. It is not just to receive information. Yeah? Because if it is communication in its true sense of the word, it should be a two-way process. I should be able to transmit as well as receive. Yeah? I should be able to talk to people like myself in horizontal communication, but also receive information from those who are above me, yeah? Elites. So information flows, communication flows need to be more democratic, more egalitarian. So we are talking about universal access and how those who are marginalized can feel empowered through this access to media technologies. Yeah? Globally, people have been talking about community media, especially community radio, as one of the best ways to reach the excluded or marginalized communities in very many useful ways, and in giving them a voice that matters most in communication, in the process of development and social change. Now, radio, for a variety of reasons, is that democratic medium. If you go to the interior parts of India, even today, whatever else people may not have, they still have a radio set, a little transistor set which they hang on their bicycles and cycle to the fields when they are farming it's in the background while they are working. Yeah, it's still, it's a cliche, but it still remains a window to the world for these people. Yeah, the news that comes on All India Radio is still an important thing for many of these people, and it's economical to receive and to listen. It's a little radio with batteries which are not very expensive. Yeah, and radio, as we have realized, is also not an expensive medium to produce, not just to receive, but to become producers of radio also. It doesn't take much. In terms of training, in terms of technology, it's affordable. Yeah, a lot of non-literate people I know in different parts of the world have learned how to do radio in 3 days, 4 days. Basics of radio. How to take a recorder, learn how to record an interview, come and play it in the studio, some basics. I mean, there are more complex stuff which they can learn on the job. Yeah? So we are also thinking of how we can demystify media, make it that to let people know that broadcasting and production is not rocket science. Anybody can learn, provided they can get access to it. Yeah, it's about access. It's about someone working to build people's capacities. Then it can become truly a voice for the excluded. Now, let me give a little bit of a background. I don't know, some of you may be from development studies, some of you here, yeah. So, you all read about the modernization theory and so on. We have corresponding things in the communication field that flow out of the modernization theory, yeah, which came out of the post-war nation-building efforts, especially in the post-colonial countries of Asia, Africa. And you look at that modernization theory, it's pretty much about how countries can become more industrialized, more progressive by adopting a particular model of development through modernization, economic growth, technological diffusion, and so on. Now, communication was a very important part in that process, in that modernization model. Some of the names that we take in that domain are people like Daniel Lerner, Everett Rogers, Wilbur Schramm. Yeah, these are communication scholars who focused on how communication can play a role in modernization. Yeah. Daniel Lerner wrote a classic book in the 1950s, a book called The Passing of Traditional Society. The book called Passing of Traditional Society. The subtitle was Modernizing the Middle East. And the book, which we learn much later, was pretty much an American State Department CIA inspired book, basically trying to respond to the Cold War threat from Soviet Union and preventing the developing countries from falling into Soviet hands. And so he does this book traveling all over the Middle East, and he comes back with a lot of excitement and exultation and saying wherever he went, people want to become like America. They want to modernize, and people think that America is the model for this modernization model, and everybody wants to become like that. So he talks about Turkey, Iran, and a lot of the countries which are today in various kinds of trouble. And then he announces the passing of traditional society. Everywhere people want to modernize by following this American model and by following some formula, urbanization, literacy, industrial growth, and then you have people participating in social, political, and economic life as citizens. Of course, by 1977, we all know what happened to his modernizing Middle East. The Islamic Revolution happens in 1977, completely unravels this modernization dream, and often is seen as a response to this West-imposed modernization model. Yeah? But that's a side thing. But the idea of communication there was to use media as tools of persuasion. How to persuade people to change their behavior into appropriate behavior that the state mandates, manages, and controls, like the two-child norm in the family planning campaign, the health and agriculture campaign, how to grow more food using chemical fertilizers, pesticides, the Green Revolution campaign. All of these are classic examples of that kind of top-down development communication. It was part of a post-colonial vision of nation building. So Nehru and other techno-scientific elite had a certain vision. I mean, so Vikram Sarabhai, often considered the father of Indian satellite revolution, thought that television, for example, could be that tool of social change. You know, properly used, it can spread all over the country. Experts can tell people, you know, how to do better agriculture, how to improve their health, and all of that through scientific and medical experts telling people how to take care of themselves and help build the nation. It is a very top-down, elitist, pedagogical perspective of communication. Yeah, that's what DevCom meant for a long time in the communication field. But that's been critiqued a lot, and in the Indian context at least, the post-1970s saw a lot of disenchantment with the modernization and economic growth principles. Following the emergency in the mid-1970s, there was a lot of churning. Many social movements emerged in that post-70s context in India. NGOs emerged as a potent entity, as an alternative engine of development with an alternative discourse on development, begins to happen only in the late 70s and into the 80s. Yeah? So along with this emerging critique of modernization paradigm, the post-colonial vision of development, grassroots organizations also started articulating alternatives to that dominant paradigm, talking about more participatory development. So the discourse was more about involving communities, more horizontal communication networks, how to work with people and so on. People are wondering why projects are not working. They are not working because people have not been consulted. People have no idea what is being done to them, not done with them. Yeah? So there were lots of grassroots level lessons learned, theoretical insights that came from all over the world, from Latin America, from Africa, towards a more horizontal communication that is more receiver-centric, yeah, not sender-centric, yeah, which is more elitist, more scientific, elite-oriented communication. Yeah, so that's the more participatory process of communication. Now, given this background in DevCom and the critique of the dominant paradigm and the emergence of the participatory model, what was happening in the broadcasting sector in India? Because this story is about community radio. Very, very briefly, broadcasting in India from the British era was very much in authoritarian control of the state. Yeah, the British, during the colonial period when radio started in India, they had their own uses for it to unite the country around the colonial project and so on. And after the British left, we pretty much inherited those same infrastructure of broadcasting. And our ruling elites have pretty much held control after the colonial rulers have left. And it has passed through particularly bad phases. For example, 1975-76, during the emergency, there was direct authoritarian control. There was no free speech and expression permitted. Radio and television really became a tool for propaganda and propagation of personality cults and so on, under the control of the state, All India Radio, Doordarshan and so on. From time to time, So 1977, Indira Gandhi loses power. There is a non-Congress government in Delhi, which for the first time talks about giving autonomy to broadcasting. Nothing much happens. The government was very short-lived. Congress is back. They don't do anything about it. And again, from late 1980s to mid-1990s, there is talk about autonomy. I won't go into details, but what you have today in the name of Prasar Bharati as an autonomous corporation modeled after BBC has been set up. And it took a while. It was not until 1997 that the Prasar Bharati Act was created. Creating at least in law some autonomy for radio and television in India. From time to time, you find that there are government committees that make statements about participatory communication, we need to go to the grassroots and all that, but nothing much happens. 1992, of course, everything changes with the Gulf War and the coming of private satellite television into India. The state sort of loses control of broadcasting. Before they knew it, before they could respond, enterprising local cable wallas have started stringing wires from telephone poles and dropping them in people's homes. And people could watch the Gulf War on CNN, first televised war in India. And there was a lot of curiosity and all of that. And after the war, it became very difficult to put the genie back in the bottle by the government. So what they ended up doing is passing laws like the Cable Regulation Act just to legitimize what was already in practice. A lot of homes already had cable illegally. So they had to legalize that, and that's how we have cable television, and the rest is history in India with 500 channels or 800 channels, whatever. So from time to time, there has been this story about autonomy. The Prasar Bharati Review Committee in 2000, which was chaired by, importantly for this city, by Mr. Narayan Murthy, where they actually said, what should be the role of the public service broadcaster? That you need to continuously expand the public sphere, what it means to say public sphere, that it must host informed debate, it should provide space for alternative and dissenting viewpoints, and it should be a voice of the voiceless. Public broadcaster, they are saying, should be a voice of the voiceless, and give substance to participatory democracy. This comes from a government-appointed review committee on Prasar Bharati. But Prasar Bharati doesn't do much. They still continue to pretty much work as a state broadcaster because through the Act of Parliament, All India Radio and Doordarshan still get funding from Parliament. Politicians still tend to control these. And nothing much happened in terms of good functional autonomy that expands the public discourse, creates a genuine public sphere in India through public broadcasting. Although I am a strong votary for public broadcasting in India, I think a lot of people think, make fun of All India Radio and Doordarshan. Whenever they want to crack a joke at media, people will say, oh, that's like Doordarshan or All India. I think they are very important institutions. We need to protect them and make sure they function well. Because there is no healthy democracy in the world which is without a strong public broadcasting system. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a third alternative, which is not public broadcasting, which is not private broadcasting, but community broadcasting. Now, 1995, a lot of things changed. Dramatic things happened. For me, this was the point of departure. This is the first time that many of us got very excited about the potential for community media with the 1995 Supreme Court judgment, and in a completely unrelated case, and like many things in India which are to do with either Bollywood or cricket, this one was to do with cricket. Ministry of Information and Broadcasting versus Cricket Association of Bengal case in the Supreme Court over rights to broadcasting, some cricket matches. Now in that case, the Supreme Court Judge Justice Sawant gave a historic judgment saying airwaves are public property and must be utilized for advancing public good. There is no legal equivalent of this kind of a judgment anywhere in the world. There is no judgment anywhere in the world where a judge said airwaves are public property. Yeah, so this really energized civil society and those of us who are sort of activists, advocates. Now what happens with this judgment? Following this judgment, many of us met here in Bangalore and came up with this Bangalore Declaration, where for the first time we demanded that there be a community radio sector. Yeah? So first time that idea was articulated in India, and several other things happened. But interestingly, the government took that judgment and ran in one direction. You know, you all know the expression Orwellian interpretations, you know, and Orwellian language. The government pretty much interpreted public in the judgment to mean private. So what they took from the judgment is a limited interpretation saying, well, the Supreme Court wanted us to demonopolize the airwaves, which is true. But then they said it is public property. But they took the demonopolization part and started selling the airwaves in private auctions to private FM radio stations. So since the late 1990s, there has been a series of auctions where the spectrum, the FM spectrum, which is public property by the way, is being sold to the highest bidders. So a lot of the big media companies and corporations then started buying FM radio licenses, the first one being in this very same city. Yeah? Radio City was the first private FM station, yeah, in the country. The same town which articulated the demand for community radio. Yeah. So many of us have protested that and said this is a complete distortion of the Supreme Court judgment. So, but we took it and ran in a different direction to say that public should mean public. You know, can public get access to the airwaves? Not those with deep pockets and those who already own other media companies. So we continued a long protest, and I won't bore you with all the details, online petitions and seminars and symposia and dharnas in Jantar Mantar and so on. And 2003, one fine day I was woken up and saying, do you know, government has put some guidelines on community radio on their website. And you know, I rush and see what the guidelines are. It says community radio guidelines, but it said established educational institutions can apply for radio licenses. So the whole point we were trying to make was, we welcomed the initiative. We said, sure, there is a scope for campus radio in the spectrum, like in many other countries. Maybe campuses can be considered some kind of communities, but these are already privileged communities who have access to mainstream media, who are educated, who are privileged, who have other options to get information and so on. We were not fighting for all this just for them. Yeah? We were talking about people like this woman in the picture, Algol Narsamma, asking why can't we have our own media? Yeah? Can only people with deep pockets and power have their media? Can't we tell our own stories through our own voices? Yeah? We were talking about such people. So we continued our protest saying, we need community radio, not what you created in the name of community radio. That continued. In 2006, late 2006, early 2007, the Central Cabinet amended, because in their mind they already have community radio. So they couldn't go back and say, we are announcing community radio. They said we are amending the community radio policy to now permit grassroots level organizations to also apply for licenses, community-based organizations to apply for licenses, NGOs primarily. So the policy as of now is that educational institutions and NGOs with at least 3 years of experience of doing community development work may apply for a license. Yeah? And they are permitted a transmitter of only 50 watt power. Some of the big stations have much more. I mean, I would be very surprised if Radio City, for example, doesn't have a 1 kilowatt transmitter, which is like a 1000 watt transmitter. Yeah? It can be heard all over Bangalore. Now, the station on Palace Road cannot be heard here, most likely. Yeah? But that's the limitation, which is okay, because the kind of communities who we wanted to get access to radio airwaves were mostly rural, underprivileged, people without access in remote areas, where 50 watt transmitter is not so bad. 15 to 20 kilometer radius, with India's density of population, it's not so bad. And in India, of course, everything changes, agriculture changes, culture changes every few kilometers. So we thought it's okay. You know, maybe people can talk in different languages, talk about different issues which are local, which pertain to their areas and so on. So that's what is permitted. The policy says no news on community radio. This is probably the only community radio policy in the world, apart from neighboring Bangladesh, which unfortunately has learned from us. I don't think any other country which has a community radio policy prohibits news broadcast. I was in Germany last week and met a lot of European community radio broadcasters. They were all shocked to know this. Saying, really, you can't broadcast news and what can you do? You know, I mean, so we would have liked local news to be allowed, but it's not. It also says no content of a political nature, which is very vague. What is political? You know, I mean, everything can be political. Yeah? So when I ask a bureaucrat, what do you mean by political? She says, you know, Professor, don't ask us for a definition. We will tell you when you go wrong. Yeah? This is the way laws are made, you know, very, very carefully made. So there's no definition, but they will crack down when they want to. But people are trying to figure out how they can do community broadcasting without violating this. There are many stations where some kind of local news is broadcast. They don't call it news. I mean, there are shows that are called like Halchal and so on. There are two women who are sitting together, and the whole format is like a village gossip, where the women are gossiping about the village, about the happenings. You know what happened the other day, you know, this sugarcane farmer, you know, drank some pesticide and, you know, why did he do that? What happened? You know, they're actually giving news, yeah, but they don't call it news. There are many such shows in many radio stations, but we have been saying that they should be able to broadcast news as a matter of right on the basis of Article 19(1)(a) in the country, free speech and expression. What is so sacrosanct about radio when people can get news everywhere today? Yeah, at the push of a button on your phone, you can get news now. Yeah, there is a Supreme Court public interest litigation we have filed. Prashant Bhushan is a lawyer for Common Cause, where we have asked the government why news prohibition cannot be lifted. The Supreme Court is busy with other matters. They are not hearing it on a regular basis. But we are hoping, as and when they hear, they will come down in favor of free speech. So the whole idea is to reclaim the radio commons. Those of you, Himanshu and others who know about the ecological commons and the struggle to regain control over the commons in the country by environmental movements, this is somewhat similar. We are saying radio waves should be treated as the commons. It belongs to the people. Yeah? How can we reclaim those radio commons? That was the struggle for the last 20 years. And how can it foster, promote an alternative public sphere, which is peopled by marginalized people, those who otherwise do not have a voice in the mainstream, how it can be a subaltern public sphere of the marginalized, women like the ones here. So this is quickly an idea of how we are faring. India has close to 200 community radio stations. Neighboring Nepal, you can imagine the size of Nepal, has 250. So we are not doing very well, even in comparison with Nepal. Of course, Nepal is a different story. They are still struggling to put together a constitution. So in that vacuum, a lot of things are happening. Bangladesh has about 17 stations. They are coming up with another 15 by the end of this year. Bhutan has just opened up their airspace because of, they have gone through a democratization process. They have just identified 8 organizations to whom they are giving experimental licenses. No policy. They are saying just start the stations. I think that's a great way. I think we made a mistake by creating a policy. I mean, we can discuss that if you like. But Bhutan has an interesting experiment going. Now, so what's happening in this last 10 years? Yeah? So let me quickly share my anxiety about what is happening with community radio, and then we can open it up for questions. Now, why did this whole NGO thing come about? Why is it that only NGOs are permitted to apply for a license? Why can't a group of people get together and say, we want to run a station? Why can't a labor union apply for a license? Why can't a cooperative run for a license? And so on. I think it's partly to do with that dominant paradigm I mentioned earlier. Communication for development, thinking that was deeply embedded in the Indian policy psyche. Yeah? So civil society organizations, media activists and advocates like me, when we were running the campaign in 1990s and 2000s, to make the government open the door a crack, we kept emphasizing the potential of using community radio for development. Yeah? Rather than foregrounding what seemed at that time to be the more radical framework of communication rights. We didn't argue in the name of right to communicate. The argument was more about why can't people talk about their own development? Social change, health, environment, education, gender, So many of these, groups that were part of the campaign themselves came out of the post-emergency social movements, dealing with social issues at the ground level. So they thought development paradigm is not a bad idea to use to let the government open up. I mean, we also didn't want to wave a red flag before an otherwise scared government to open up the airwaves. I mean, we had long arguments, online debates. There was a time when there was a debate between the then Minister of Information and Broadcasting, who is now the Foreign Minister, and some of us activists, we had a debate where she said, what if the airwaves fall into the wrong hands, when we were demanding that she opens up. So I retorted saying, airwaves have already fallen into the wrong hands. If Rupert Murdoch can broadcast from India, airwaves have already fallen into the wrong hands. And we are talking about airwaves for your own communities, your own people. And you can monitor them. You can see if they are doing anything anti-national. This is the other thing. There was a fear about security, sovereignty. So India was already beginning to become more of a security state than it is today. But by that time, there were some of those fears already. Terrorism, extremism, and so on. So no licenses are given in the Northeast, for example. Or in areas like Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, very few licenses are given. Similarly, in Jammu and Kashmir, yeah, because they're all dubbed conflict zones, and people don't have access to airwaves there. Now, what is happening is, because community radios have been in the hands of NGOs primarily, the last 10 years of documentation, research that our team at the UNESCO Chair on Community Media has revealed some interesting things coming out. For example, a lot of NGOs who have pressure from donor agencies. Yeah? Donor agencies always want their money's worth, yeah? The value for their money. So what is the big thing they always say? Scale up. Yeah, you need to scale it up. 15 kilometer radius, 50 watt transmitter, how does it help? We need to do more. We need to show impact on behavior change. There are very different kinds of questions that NGOs and donor agencies have. Now, all kinds of aberrations come in. For example, we have been tracking some community initiatives in Jharkhand. There's one particular station about which we were very positive and we were very hopeful that it will do something interesting. Now, 5 years down the line, when we go back to that radio station and see what they are doing, they said, we have now adopted a rights-based approach in community. I said, great. So what is that rights-based approach? Basically, it meant government officials come into the studio, sit and answer questions about what government schemes are there that people can apply for. That was their rights-based approach. Okay, people have a right to access government schemes, but a rather limited notion of what rights-based approach is. People were not even questioning the officials, which they should be. That is one. The second thing that has happened is, so instead of having active community voices with lively discussions and so on, what they had was experts sitting in studios and giving gyan to the people. A second change that has happened, 5 years before when we went, they were covering about 40 villages. And they had about 16 reporters who were spread out into 40 villages and covering. Everybody knew the names of the reporters. They would all be able to walk to the villages, quite close by. Because of this scaling up, the donor agency said you have to work in many more villages. So they increased it to 160 villages and they shrunk the number of reporters to 5 because economies of scale. You can't afford to have that many reporters, paying them, volunteers, all of that. So 5 people now have to cover 160 villages. They are barely able to visit a village once in 6 months, 7 months. Nobody even recognizes these community radio reporters. Now a big thing that has happened is all the women, there were 6 of them in the 14, have all dropped out. Because these villages are very far, transportation issues, security, they said we can't do this work. Yeah? And community radio was one of the ways in which gender empowerment was thought of when we had visualized. So, a lot of these kinds of aberrations have come into community radio. You look at another research we have done in the Bundelkhand region, UP and MP. About 3 radio stations were receiving funding continuously from a large multilateral agency. I won't name the agency, but good funding every year for 5 years. They used that money to employ a lot of people, whereas community radio was supposed to be volunteer driven. Yeah? They started paying salaries, doing, spending money beyond their means on program production and so on. Come the 5th year, the multilateral agency said, okay, we are washing our hands of this project. We are done. We want to move on to other projects. Now you be sustainable on your own. It was a complete disaster. Some of these stations almost collapsed because they became too dependent on donor-driven funding and completely set aside participatory processes, which was the essence of participatory development, participatory communication, people being involved in programming, the staff members who are getting salaries beginning to think of themselves as professionals. How can we let these people do radio? They are not trained like me. Whereas that was the whole idea of community radio. You pass on the expertise to others. You widen the circle of expertise, so more and more people can do community radio. So that's happening. The government has also now set up funding schemes for community radio. There is a community radio support scheme. There is a case that you can make for public funding of community radio, which many of us have been advocating. But the way it has been set up, it creates some very uneasy relationship with the state now, which stations get the funding, on what grounds, and increasingly in Vigyan Bhavan in Delhi, which is the big convention center, government convention center, every year a community radio sammelan happens in March. Now all the babus sit on the stage, all the community radio stations sit down, and each one comes and says, we will give you money, make programs on Panchayati Raj. We will give you money, make programs on Swachh Bharat. Yeah, make programs on, Jan Dhan scheme. So it's all about schemes of the government, and they will give you money to make. And community radio stations are lining up for these funds. Because they are struggling for sustainability, they think, why not, this is great funding. Government also gives them advertisements to put on the radio stations. There is some money there. Bharat Nirman, Jan Dhan Yojana, Beti Bachao, whatever, probably well-meaning schemes, but they're all government schemes which are advertised. And it has some interesting impact, right? I mean, like small newspapers, historically, small newspapers in India grew, they were supposed to be like community newspapers, but many of them grew completely dependent on state funding, government advertisements, those full-page classifieds and government things. That is what small newspapers survive on in India. Yeah, and they completely lost the community edge they were supposed to have. I am afraid that same thing can happen with community radio in India. Yeah? So many of us are now beginning, to cut the story short, are beginning to say that, we really need to reboot community radio in India. Go back to basic principles. What did we start community radio for? What are the core principles? Where is the community in community radio? A good friend of mine, Zaini Ibrahim, was the founder of Bush Radio in Cape Town in South Africa, who died last year, a lifetime community organizer, used to love to say community radio is 99% about community, only 1% about radio. Yeah? Which is the essence of community radio. And if you forget the community and you think it is all about technology and about broadcasting, then you lost that idea of having a third sector broadcasting, people's voices being heard, telling their own stories, and so on. Out of 200 stations today, about 100 of them are educational institutions. Because remember, in my story, they had a head start of 3 or 4 years. The process of getting license is very long-winded. It takes a year to 2 years to get a license. So many people are dissuaded from applying for a license. People who really need community radio are still not getting them. I have been making a case that in conflict zones, actually, you need community radio. If you don't give people access to democratic means of articulating their demands, their concerns, they will take to the guns. Yeah? Government has a scheme where they said development as an antidote to terrorism and Maoism and so on. I have been making the case that look at access to airwaves as a development act. Just as you are building a road to counter the Maoists, you need to give people access to airwaves as a developmental act, if not anything. Yeah? So people should be able to talk about their issues in a democratic space. Yeah? So some of those issues are still pending. I don't think in the current climate anything much will happen on those kinds of issues. But this is an ongoing struggle to sustain a genuine community radio sector in India. And I think that the vision is somewhat getting blurred with this developmentalist vision. I think we need to talk about people's rights, yeah, and access to people's rights, including the right to communicate. Even if you talk about human rights, the UN Charter of Human Rights, one of the key rights is the right to communicate. Yeah? And somehow we lost sight of that in this, in our appealing to the government's sensibility for using radio for development, and got trapped in that. Yeah? So I'll stop there, and if you have questions, comments, and I'm sure you should have many. I ran through a lot of the details, and I'll be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the talk. It was kind of eye-opening on community and media. Sir, like few months back, I attended a seminar by a director-producer of the Bombay media industry, and someone asked him like, why do you keep making the same old soap operas like year on year and like that? So his answer was like, you know what people want to see is like if you see the recent TRPs of the soap operas, so the most viewed the TV serial was like Diya or Bati, the title. So where the main character of the serial, like the lady, the family brings the laptop home, like they bought this, and she was like, oh my god, this is a laptop, and she touches and for the whole like 30 minutes she just touches the laptop and confirms, yeah, it is a laptop. So he said that this was the highest like ranked or the highest TRP
For that
the
show.
serial got. Yeah. So this is what people want to see. So what can like we as directors or producers can do with that? This is what you want to see. So if you change your views or your like, I don't know like how to answer that, but so my question is like, how do we get to know that what people want to hear or see? Like,
What did you think as a viewer, as a consumer of media, when that producer said that's what people want? What did you feel?
sir, I guess it depends on like
Do you,
society.
do you want that kind of stuff?
No.
So, I mean, that's a very easy sort of industry remark to make, no? That they are giving people what they want. And what choices do people have? See, the nature of the media industry is such that formulas work very well, and until people run out of squeezing that formula dry completely, like the K serials, the Balaji Telefilms K serials, which sort of now are on the decline because they ran out of ideas now. But for a while, nobody wanted to make any soap opera that's different from the K serial because they don't want to take a risk. Yeah? TRPs are all about meeting a certain industry standard content and people who are consuming them. See, if you don't offer alternatives, many times I see some good programs on TV which are taken off. They don't run very long. Just when you thought, hey, this is a good show. You know why? Because the wrong demographics are watching that. You know, the right kind of people are not watching that. So, very often, people may not want millions of audiences. Even if you get small numbers, if they are the right kind, who have deep pockets, who can buy the stuff that is advertised, the consumer goods that are advertised on television, they are quite happy. So shows that they think appeal to such audiences will run. But you don't find other kinds of shows run. I mean, there's a whole political economy of media that make them do certain things. That's what I meant in the beginning of why we have so many media outlets but no real choice. They're all homogeneous. Everything is same. Because nobody wants to take a risk and do something different. Yeah, what if they fail? Because there is so much riding on the industry, on failure. I think that's the problem.
Thanks.
Yep.
Hello, sir. I did my field internship in community radio. So my question is, you already spoke about it regarding the
You're doing
sustainable.
or you've done?
I did my internship in
Where was the study?
in Sargur community.
In?
Sargur, the organization called SVYM. The community radio name is Janadhwani. So regarding sustainability, my question is, the community radio was completely run by the organization, not Mairada, SVYM, Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement. The the salary of the employees and reporters was given by the organization. So my question is how to be sustainable in the long run, because it's difficult to get the revenue from the community. So how to make it sustainable in the long run?
Yeah, this is a question that all community radio stations ask when they get together. In 5 minutes time, they will all come to that question. How do we sustain the station? No? I mean, it's an important question financially, but many of us have been saying that sustainability should not be seen only as a financial thing. There is social sustainability, there is community sustainability. If your community is not involved, if socially people are not mobilized to work for the station, to come and participate in the station, they wouldn't care if the station dies tomorrow. I think that's the most important kind of sustainability, that people feel that it is their station and they want to continue to run it. I will tell you of one small rural community radio station in Telangana where the women collectives of this NGO, which are about 75 different collectives, adding up to 5,000 women, each woman contributes about 100 rupees a year, not month, year, to the radio station. Okay? Now, it's something. Yeah, you are looking at 5,000 women contributing 100 rupees each. Yeah, do your math. And it's not going to serve all the funding needs of the station. But what it has done is, it has given a sense of ownership to all these people in the villages. There is a, I jokingly call it a community shareholder model. These 5,000 women have become shareholders in the station. So you need to think of some creative ways of involving the people, seeing how the people take ownership. Yeah? With NGOs and donor agencies holding hands forever, some of these pressures come. We need revenue, we need to advertise, what advertisements do we get? If you're in a remote area in Bundelkhand, who is going to advertise in that station? The advertisers are saying, no, I mean, all these poor people listen to the radio, they can't buy anything, so what do I advertise for? So they don't want to advertise. The government allows 5 minutes of advertising to every 1 hour of broadcast. So if they are on air for 10 hours, they can actually broadcast close to 1 hour of ads. But in those places, nobody advertises. Yeah? I mean, there is something to local advertising, I don't mind. I mean, I know of a very creative station in Haryana where they have accepted 50 rupees from a farmer who wanted to advertise his lost buffalo. Yeah? Announce reward for somebody who can find his buffalo. They said 50 rupees. Why not? Greetings messages, somebody's birthday I want to announce. In Tamil Nadu it's very popular. A lot of community radio stations do that. Now 100 rupees. Now people can afford that. It's not going to sustain the station in terms of revenue, but what it does is it gives ownership to people that it's my station. I can do such things for 50 rupees, 100 rupees on this station. It creates some community solidarity, sense of ownership. When I was doing research in Jharkhand, we used to have a hypothetical question in the fieldwork where we used to ask people, what if this radio station is shut down tomorrow? What difference does it make to your life? Yeah, so we had all of our team trained to ask that question. So many people came back in the evening and said, people were so angry when we asked that question because they were not looking at it as a hypothetical question. They were thinking that we are actually going to shut down the station, that we are government people or something, and they were saying, finally we have a voice through this station. Here is somebody who listens to us, where we can go and speak, and now you are saying, ab band kar denge isko. So there was a lot of, so that shows some solidarity with the station, they want to keep it alive. So people think of creative ways. I mean, Nepal, they have lots of things. I mean, Nepal stations have something called Friends of Nepal, Friends of Community Radio kind of thing. There's a station called Radio Sagarmata in Kathmandu Valley, where you can become a friend of Sagarmata and they'll give you a card that you are a friend of this community radio station. You can use it at the local stores to buy things at a discount. And the store passes on some of that to the radio station. Yeah? That's his community service, the store owners. Yeah? So there are interesting things that people do. Communities pay, take membership in the station. People raise projects. They want to do a series of shows on cancer